Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli, and you're listening to edition 117 of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK, putting out weekly shows that are available across the globe. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracy, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. For anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, or maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us at info@thatalks.com, or you can contact us via the website and the contact tab there. Don't forget you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. If you'd like to learn more about how to subscribe to us, again, you can go to our website and there's a tab there that will give you a few more details on the best option for you. Well, thank you for tuning in again, ladies and gentlemen, be it whether you're in a car, in the evening, in the morning, down the gym, cooking some dinner for yourself, whatever you're doing. One of the wonders of the internet and alternative media, you can be listening wherever you are now, and we're grateful that you're listening to us. It's good to be back, and we've got another really interesting guest coming up today, someone I've wanted to get on the show for quite a while, and probably going to hit on a few controversial subjects, maybe, especially with what's going on in Europe at the moment with the EU and the referendum, and generally, I mean, what's going on in the world. There's so much controversy out there at the moment, so I'm sure we'll be touching on that in a little while with Shana and our guest today. I apologise for last week for no shows. Sometimes David, myself, Shana, we're all very busy, and plus if you juggle that with some of our guests who have obviously got very busy schedules, sometimes it just doesn't happen and we have to postpone and replan for the coming weeks, which is what we had to do last week, although we got a busy week ahead of us this week. And also I'd like to mention, while I'm on this topic of busyness, David, he'd love to be on the show and he loves being on the show, but he's been so busy and will be busy over the coming weeks with a lot of his dramaturge work. There's actually a production he's doing, which I am actually doing with David. I'm acting in this production myself. It's a production called Shakespeare Tonight. You can go to the website shakespearetonight.co.uk, and they'll be performing in Camden at the beginning of August and in Edinburgh at the end of August. And I just thought I'd give that a plug. It looks like it's going to be a really cool play, and I'm sure David will be on at some point before then, but I just thought I'd let you guys know, just in case you wonder, where's David? He hasn't been on for a while. It certainly isn't for the love of the show, but sometimes he's just got to take care of other bits and pieces. And but rest assure me, he will be back. So, well, with that, I think it's time to crack on, and we should really head to across the pond to our THA Bond, Shana Collins.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you. Been very, very, very busy this last couple of weeks or so. But how about yourself? You been okay?
I've been doing well. I think last week we kind of knocked off and weren't able to record anything, but I blame it on the retrogrades. Other than that, just pushing through. Oh
yeah, well, we even when we have our quiet patches, we always come bouncing back with a vengeance. So we've got some good shows coming up, including the one today that may get a bit controversial. Well, I say controversial. I think anything now that you can go on the internet and different things like this podcast and alternative publishing companies and stuff that just gets all different sorts of information out there that you don't perhaps get in your BBC or your Sky or your CNN or Fox News or whatever it is, the commercial sources all over the place, isn't it? So, I mean, are you looking forward to this one?
I most certainly am. I'm getting away from mainstream media. It's funny because we call it mainstream, but so many people have really shifted their attention to some of the smaller, more personally set up, privately owned kind of situations like the THA podcast, like Arktos Publishing, and people that don't really have to worry about, is that too taboo to really discuss?
Oh yeah, I think the in commas mainstream it's losing its way a little bit because of just different alternative things. Now, alternative things aren't always correct, and obviously you should never believe anything gospel, but it's just great to have the availability, just source information that you can look at, read, watch, and ingest, and then go somewhere else. And it just gives you more of a chance to make your own mind up, rather than, I think, the mainstream that is just so this narrow-minded hold on everything. I think with stuff like the elections coming up, where you're seeing people like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders that are kind of taking over what would be the most common likely candidates that would in the past have been much more popular. They're kind of showing that people aren't getting swung by the mainstream so much. And it's similar over here at the moment with the EU referendum and that kind of stuff. You're kind of getting a sense that that people aren't trusting the mainstream anymore and are going to alternative sources. So that's why I enjoy guests like we got coming on in a second.
Most definitely. We have people saying, do your own homework and do your own research, and having the avenues to do that is half of the battle. So very excited for today. Okay,
well, this evening we'll be speaking with John Morgan. He is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the alternative publisher Arktos Media. He's also the co-editor at the new Write On website. Arktos was officially launched to the public on the 1st of May 2010. Since that time, they've published more than 50 titles in 4 languages and circulated them globally, both through their own website and through their distribution channels. They've established themselves as the principal publisher in English for the writings of the European New Right, or Alternative Right, school of political thought. Hi there, John. Thanks for taking the time for us today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Well, it's been I've wanted to get you on the show for a while because I've read a few of the books published by Arktos, and I mean Arktos like to hit on a lot of the things that aren't in the mainstream. Some of it can be seen as controversial and so on. Let's start off with, what was the inspiration behind starting Arktos and getting it off the ground?
Well, I should mention that before we had Arktos, I was part of another company that had pretty much the same goals, that was called Integral Tradition Publishing. And we started that at the end of 2006. And we kept that going for 3 years, and then it ended up merging into what became Arktos at the end of 2009. But my own inspiration for doing it was just when I was a student in the 1990s, and in the years right after I was a student, and I was kind of checking out different ideas and developing my interests, I came across things like the European New Right, which was started in France by Alain de Benoit and others, and traditionalism like Julius Evola and René Guénon, also like the conservative revolutionary school. From the 1920s. And it struck me that there was so little available on this in English. So my main goal in starting Arktos was both to try to make more of this material available in English, and also to hopefully publish original works that were sort of in the same vein, but by Anglo-American authors and others who sort of had a compatible worldview, or at least relevant interests.
Right. Yeah. It seems. Obviously, since the internet's come out, there seems to be obviously much more of an audience for alternative news, alternative books and videos and whatnot. Do you find, obviously being published yourself, do you find that that's growing, that more people are turning to the alternative side of things rather than your Waterstone bookstores and the mainstream stuff, that people are actually taking seriously more the alternative side of things?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about it. When we look at just, the Arktos sales, they've been going up pretty much consistently almost every month since we started 6 years ago. So and there's been a real explosion in that in the last year or so, which I attribute to things like the migrant crisis and the Trump phenomenon in the U.S. and so forth, which has drawn more attention to the alternative right. But yeah, there's no question in my mind that it's growing, and I think that audience was always there. It was just there was never any means to tap into it before. I've always said before that one of our tenets in Arktos is that we're opposed to globalization. The irony is that we use the tools of globalization in order to make Arktos happen, and that includes using the internet and social media and using print on demand, which is how we publish our books, and of course also the fact that we've been based. We were based in India previously for 5 years, and now we're based in Hungary, and we can be in these places and still distribute our books globally. I mean, even 20 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. So, yeah, I think it's us and others, just figuring out how to use all this new technology to reach people who, perhaps if they hadn't been exposed to this, wouldn't even realize that it was one of their interests. But, we're able to communicate with them through all these new channels.
Right. Yeah. I mean, where you touched on the alternative right there, I mean, it does seem to be at the moment. I mean, it's kind of, some people view it very controversially that there's a new rise in right-wing politics around Europe at the moment and in America. And I mean, obviously, you guys looking at your book catalog, you've got a catalog there that covers a lot of this research, like different views on history, politics, and as you say, the alternate right, which is growing at the moment. And there seems to be two sides of it. There's one side of it where people say, people are getting this wrong. There's a lot there to look at and to learn from and to understand a bit, and have a perspective on what's going on in the world today regarding globalism. How do you find people's reaction to that? I mean, do you get a lot of criticism for covering that side of things, or do you get a lot of support for it?
Well, we get both support and criticism depending on where it's originating from. I mean, you can imagine, the sorts of people who are very critical about it. I mean, people who are very dogmatically liberal. I'm using liberal in the European sense rather than the American. Which includes globalization and capitalism and multiculturalism, things like that. I mean, people who are very dogmatically adhere to that ideology, of course, think that what we're doing is bad, because even though they talk about how they want to be open to all sorts of points of view, when it comes to the right, they're really not open to those things, which are things based in concepts like tradition and traditionalism and so forth. But certainly when it comes to people who are sympathetic to what we're doing, and I don't even just mean political sympathizers, but also people who just kind of like the fact that Arktos is trying to do something different than any other publisher. We get a lot of praise all the time. I probably every week I get a piece of fan mail from somebody. It's we're reaching the people we want to reach, but we never had any illusions that the people who we oppose were going to just go away. I mean, they're there, and of course they try to call us names and try to make us out to be Nazis or whatever, but it just kind of goes with the territory.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, myself, through my life, I've generally been pretty what I'd describe as liberal, but I mean, it just seems to me today that the whole what is right wing is very questionable at the moment. And I think, you look at the Republican Party over in America, and it's just, you just can't trust it. For whatever anyone thinks of Trump, whatever anyone's personal view of him, he's been a smash hit with regards to the Republican Party. He's brought them more votes. He's took them off the ground. So you would have thought, from their perspective, it would have been better to just give him some support and say, look, let's cut things around the edges here, and we'll get behind you. But they've completely reject him and kind of expose themselves in a way, and now you're kind of getting a lot of people that are turning their backs on the Republican Party and even turning towards these small libertarian right-wing sort of parties and stuff. So do you find that the basically right-wing politics is kind of finding a new identity at the moment, or does it need to?
You're talking about America,
more so America, I guess, at the moment. Yeah. Well, actually, in Europe as well, I guess. It's just America just seems to be a bit more in people's face about it at the moment. But
Yeah, well, that's for sure. Well, I haven't been back to the U.S. in a year and a half, so I don't have any firsthand view of the whole Trump phenomenon. But I mean, from what I've been reading and hearing, and just from what I know from the fact of growing up in America and so forth, is that I think people were tired of both parties, quite some time ago. I mean, you watch the Daily Show or something like that over the last 15 years, and there was making fun of how boring and how unoriginal politics had really become in America, and how there often really weren't any significant differences between the Democrats and the Republicans, which I would absolutely agree with. I mean, I should say, I mean, I've always considered the Republican Party to be a liberal party. I mean, there hasn't in decades, if ever, been like a true right-wing party in the U.S. There's just been two branches of liberalism with slightly different priorities and backers. But I think what you're seeing now is, I hesitate to say that, oh, this is the emergence of a true right in the U.S. I mean, that I think it's a bit too easy to get carried away that way. I mean, I do see Trump as a good thing, but not because I think he's going to, if he gets elected, he's going to save America and transform the world. I mean, I don't really think we know what he's going to do, but I think he's good in the sense that he's wrecked the Republican establishment, and he's kind of brought at least some of these, in a very crude manner, but he's brought some of these concerns of the alternative right, like over immigration and racial issues and so forth, to the fore. So I see that as a positive thing, even if I don't know what we can expect from him. But of course, it's not even just limited to the Republicans in the U.S. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders reflects the same exact frustration on the left in the U.S. I mean, Obama turned out to be a huge disappointment for most people. And a year ago, or slightly less than a year ago, when people here in Europe were asking me what I thought of Trump and about Sanders, I really thought by December both of them were going to be a memory. But I really underestimated, the kind of frustration that there was in both parties. And now that I think about it, it does make sense. I think that it's just an outpouring of we're tired of this. We can't just have business as usual. We need something new. So I think it's great that both, I wish Sanders had been even more successful than he was. But the fact that Trump has won and Sanders has really shaken things up, I think is great. Now, as far as Europe goes, it's a lot more complicated because you're talking about a lot of different countries. But I think it's a similar thing where, basically we see the order that has prevailed in Europe since 1968 kind of collapsing. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's finished yet, but I think, the trend is clearly that people are becoming more and more frustrated with these same, claims that, immigration is great for a society and multiculturalism is great and all these things. People in Europe are becoming much more skeptical about that. And, I think when you see the success of things like the FPÖ and Fidesz and Jobbik here in Hungary, and any number of other Front National in France, I think that's what explains it. I think people are just getting tired of hearing the same things that they've been hearing for the last 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of these parties you get, like here in UKIP, you've got UKIP, you've got, like you say, Front National in France. But you look at these parties and then you look at their policy and you think, well, are they really right-wing? It's kind of like they're being presented as, a far-right party that's exploding. I mean, even UKIP over here, which is UKIP, a lot of their policies are actually quite sort of centre-right. They're just a bog-standard right-wing party. But it's like they're kind of
actually liberals because they're really more libertarian. But
it's. But I'd like to touch on. I mean, obviously we've got the EU referendum. That's big news here in Europe at the moment. So it'll be interesting to hear your perspectives on that. I just want to cover the subject on history. Some of the books you cover on history, because at the moment it just seems to be that generally people have such a brainwashed going back to this sort of liberalism type of thing, where it's like very anti-European. Really, we're the pits. Look what our ancestors done, this or that. And then when you look at it, it's almost like they don't look at a bigger picture of history, and they just take these sort of these segments that are just being thrown around just to sort of reduce the morale of Western nations. But I like the way you've covered with this alternative stuff. I mean, obviously I haven't read every book, so I can't comment on everything, but some of the stuff I've looked into, it just really throws out like a deeper insight of what happened there. Tell us a little bit about that, your views on history and how that seems to be kind of a bit of a war on history, if you like, at the moment.
You talking about like European or maybe Western history, I guess.
European. I guess it's European would have to be the better word. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we haven't published a lot of history in Arktos. We've published a few books related to it. I would like to do more, but most of the stuff we've done has been in other areas. But we have done some. And when it comes to my own point of view, I mean, it all goes to what Orwell said, about, he who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future. I mean, the radical leftists recognized this, 60, 70 years ago, when they started to take control of all the educational and media institutions in the West, after the Second World War. I think they've been very good at, trying to recast history in their own mold. So I think portraying history, I mean, it's very difficult to say, well, what is true history? But I think we can definitely say, to me, there's no doubt about this, that the kind of history that we see being pushed in the mainstream today is very much a revisionist type of history. It has a very specific agenda.
Absolutely.
And I know some people would argue that, well, all history has an agenda. Yeah, that might be true, but I think this is a little more severe than you'll find in most cases. So, I think I think going back and revisiting that can be useful. I mean, we just in Arktos we're beginning to republish this 11-volume history of Sweden that was compiled, I guess, about 80 years ago by a fellow named Grimberg. And my colleagues, most of my colleagues in Arktos are Swedish. They really wanted to do this because they said it was written before all of this politically correct revisionist view of Swedish history that's now very much in vogue came about. So it's a very pure view of Swedish history. And we had a couple of people who worked on it to sort of bring it up to date over the last 80 years. And now we're going to issue the entire set. So I think that's the battle over history, of course, is an integral part of what we're trying to do overall metapolitically right now in Europe and the US.
Cool. Well, as I mentioned to Shana earlier, I think it's just great to have as many sources of history and politics as possible, so that we don't just get lost into the mainstream's kind of iron grip on that. But Shana, I'm sure you're itching to get involved in this one.
I was enjoying the introduction. Thank you, John, for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
So I wanted to jump right into the revisionist theory element because it seems like one of the focuses or MOs for Arktos would be to make a more balanced accounting of the history so that we don't have what we've had in the past, the victor wrote the history books, whereas now, as you were saying, there's more of a PC element to history. Even here in America, they're taking down statues of Robert E. Lee, they're putting Harriet Tubman on the $10 bill, getting rid of Andrew Jackson, and all of these other elements because they feel it doesn't fit a particular view that we want, that they want to be teaching the next generation about the history of the country. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me that you would be putting out the history of Sweden, which I'm hoping will be translated to English because I'd love to read more about it.
Well, that would be quite an undertaking, but that's possible. Maybe we could do an abridged version or something, but I would be in favor of that.
Now, what are the topics that you personally feel are most attractive to be shared and disseminated among the public?
In terms of what can best sort of shift the paradigm of social paradigm right now?
Sure, let's go with that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we don't have any specific agenda in Arktos. I mean, we're not trying to promote a particular ideology or political system or whatever. It's, when I've tried to distill what we're trying to do before, I just call it alternatives to modernity. And what I mean by that is, that I think it's quite obvious now that all over the world, I mean, even in the countries ordinarily referred to as the third world, basically all societies and all governmental systems, in spite of some remaining cultural differences, all basically subscribe to the same basic suppositions about politics and even philosophically to a certain extent. So our idea in Arktos was, we wanted to present books that challenge that and say, well, just because it's become the globalized way of doing things in recent years, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way. So, our goal has always just been to produce works that challenge the prevailing culture, especially in the West. Now, in terms of how it's best to approach that, I wouldn't say there's any one area. And I think having a multiplicity of approaches is good because it really makes it so that there's something that will appeal to everyone. I mean, everybody has their own particular interests and so forth. So, there might be somebody who's especially interested in history, so you have to give them some history to get into. And then there's, we've published works on political ideas, political philosophy that appeals to a certain segment of the population. And we've done a number of books on philosophy, also on religion from a traditionalist point of view. We've published works in the field of literature. And I think all of these kind of approach the problem from different angles. And of course, I'm not trying to suggest that they all offer the same solutions, far from it, but they all in some way, challenge the prevailing paradigm, I would say. So we try to do a little bit of everything, you could say.
So you're lighting up different points of the brain to challenge the status quo, which I absolutely love. Would you say that in that collection, do you publish fictional works besides scientific essays? And as a sub-question to that, would you, if given the opportunity, have picked up the work of Carlos Castaneda, the Don Juan saga, knowing that there was so much controversy involved?
Well, I'll answer the first question first. What was it you said? Fiction. Yes. Mm-hmm. We published a few novels. We've got a couple of novels, both in Swedish and in English, by a Swedish novelist named Lars Holger Holm. And we've also published a series of novels. We'll have more forthcoming by this terrific American novelist who I consider him to be one of the greatest living American novelists, but he's not very well known. His name is Tito Perdue. He's from Alabama, and he writes from very much a traditional Southern perspective. I mean, he's in the same tradition as Faulkner and people like that. I think he's just fantastic. But he's also very much in our wavelength. I mean, he doesn't bow to political correctness. I mean, he just writes what he wants to write, and he doesn't worry about what's fashionable or whatever. So yes, we have ventured into fiction a little bit. I would like to do a lot more, but that's what we have so far. Now, as for your second question, remind me, what was it again?
If you would have picked up the work of Carlos Castaneda.
Right. Castaneda was somebody I first read. I'm 42 now. I first started reading him when my brother gave me some of his books when I was in my late teen years. I didn't really know what to make of them then. Then I kind of revisited them a few years later. By my mid-20s is when I started getting more interested in esotericism and religion and so forth. So I got a lot more, I was a lot more receptive to it at that point. And I liked it a lot. And I didn't know when I first read his work about all the controversies that had emerged subsequent. But in retrospect, I mean, it's a symptom of the modern world that people are really hung up on the idea of authenticity and was everything actually, real in a scientifically verifiable way? I think if you just simply approach the books as mythology or as records of a journey into a kind of a psychic or psychological space, an exploration of the soul, they're still perfectly valid. The question as to whether they actually have scientific merit, I don't know. That's something other people have to decide. But I certainly still think that they're worthwhile books, and obviously a lot of people agree because a lot of his books are still in print. So
Yeah, there seems to be this wall for a lot of people, about whether or not they can really subscribe to an idea if it's written from a fictional sense as opposed to an autobiographical sense, or the scientific element of writing essays or journals and so on. So it's interesting to see how an idea can inspire someone, and then if it's given to closer scrutiny, if that changes the effect and the passion that a person has for that topic. Would you agree, disagree?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you read something and you derive value from it, I don't think it matters whether it's true or not. I mean, it's that's where people get hung up, I think, with religious scriptures, because they, the most common dismissal of things like the Bible or even the Vedic texts or whatever is that, well, that's the stories in those books are just ridiculous. They couldn't have really happened. Which may or may not be true, but ultimately I think it's beside the point, because, I mean, the stories, obviously people passed them down for thousands of years for a very specific reason, which was that they found meaning in it, either on an individual or on a social level. It helped to define who they were, and I also think it probably helps in self-development in some ways. So I see things like Castaneda as kind of in the same light. I think getting too hung up on what is true and what is fictional. That's a very modern distinction to make. I mean, when you go into the realm of myth, I mean, it's kind of both and neither at the same time, if that makes sense.
Oh, most definitely. I think that's a great segue into. I wanted to come back to the idea of Trump, the unapologetically blunt element of his interaction with the public, and how that affects people's perspective. Either it shuts them down 100% and they're unavailable to any of the ideas that he has, or they are impassioned by it and they're amused by it, so they're very engaged. Now, you mentioned that you receive fan mail every once in a while about the different, from the different work that you're doing with Arktos. And I was wondering about the opposite, if you're receiving any kind of cultural pushback for the work that you're doing, where people are saying, this is wrong, you shouldn't be publishing about this, or that, why are you giving a platform to this kind of speech, et cetera, et cetera.
In terms of my personal correspondence, I can only think of maybe one or two times in my, since I started doing this, when I've gotten like personal correspondence from somebody saying something like that. But when it comes to Arktos itself, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's groups out there where their sole function is to harass organizations like Arktos that don't sort of toe the party line of liberalism. I mean, you have the SPLC in the US, and you've got Searchlight in the UK, and there's Expo in Sweden. I mean, these are organizations that their sole function is to shut down any kind of alternative debate when it comes to things like, race and culture and politics and so forth. Now, that's not to say, I'm not saying that everybody who they target is therefore a saint. I mean, they do have some justified concerns, but I think when they actually have to stoop to actually calling us names for publishing books, I mean, I think it shows the weakness of their position. I mean, they're actually afraid of the fact that we're publishing books. I mean, compared to Random House or something like that. We're obviously very small, yet they try to depict us as some sort of threat to human civilization or something like that. That if people could read our books, like tomorrow they're going to be firing up the ovens or something like that, and it's really quite ridiculous. And I think it's both that they're not willing to admit the fact that these ideas that they've been propagating for the last 50 years have failed and are starting to lose their appeal, and also just they're making a hell of a lot of money. I mean, I'm sure the budgets of the SPLC and Searchlight in the average year are probably far beyond what Arktos makes in profits in a year. So, for them, it's actually become a business. So they have to portray us demonically, to try to convince people that they should be afraid of us, which therefore justifies their own existence. So, yeah, absolutely. They're definitely, fortunately, these groups, tend to be on the fringe. Nobody has ever, from the mainstream I can think of ever condemned us for what we're doing. But there's certainly these people I mentioned. I mean, they're certainly quite vocal.
There's always outliers. Now, before I hand this back over to Paul, because I know that he's itching to get back in, I want to ask if there's anything Arktos would not publish based on the material. So if it's well written and well thought out, is there anything that you would consider too controversial? And how would you deal with those kind of materials? Like, is there a voting system or?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have a board of directors. I'm one of them, of course, because I'm editor-in-chief, and we've also got some shareholders. So, but generally, there's very rarely when we ever have a disagreement about something. I mean, if something is well written and has a good argument, well thought out, we'll entertain it. I mean, we do, as a rule, we won't publish stuff that relates to fascism or Nazism. We do get that kind of stuff from time to time, and I'm not even saying that that's an illegitimate perspective, but it's not something that we're interested in getting involved with. I mean, it's not what I believe in personally either, but I could admit that there were aspects of fascism and National Socialism that were interesting, but we try not to get into that. At least not if it's coming from an ideological perspective. I mean, somebody might submit a historical work that objectively imagines those things. Objectively examines those things. We might consider a work like that. If there were things we wouldn't publish, I mean, I don't think we would publish a book, that was promoting multiculturalism or globalization or something like that. Not because it would be too controversial, but just because that's not what we do. I mean, we've always been promoting an alternative line on these issues. So even though we don't have a set ideology, there is a certain set of ideas and perspectives that we're concerned with. So we don't really want to stray outside of that. Not that I have to say I can think of too many cases where people have submitted works like that, but speaking theoretically, that's the way it would be.
Absolutely fascinating. Paul, before I take up the rest of the hour, did you want to jump in?
No, that was cool. That was some interesting questions there. It was, one thing I'd like to touch on as well is the growing popularity in paganism, probably more so heathenry, Asatru, Odinism, this kind of stuff, because it's obviously Christianity is taking quite a hit at the moment around Europe. And it seems to be, there's a lot of, and when I say paganism, like it's almost like more of a cultural affiliation with these religions rather than a spiritual one, which I guess that's down to the individual. But it just seems generally there's the movement's growing. Do you find that? I mean, you have some books on that. Do you find that it is something that's beginning to thrive?
Well, certainly, I think any sort of alternative religious perspective is being welcomed right now. I mean, I think we see that in the U.S. Just because I think people are getting kind of tired of the sort of evangelical rhetoric that's been dominating in the U.S. over the last 40 years or so, which tends to be so ridiculous and of such low intellectual quality. So, when people tell me, even though I think religion and spirituality are important, if somebody tells me they're an atheist who's American, I can't really blame them because Christianity has assumed such ridiculous forms in the U.S. In recent decades. But in Europe too, yeah. I mean, I'm not of course, as familiar since I'm American, but it does seem to me that whereas in the U.S. it's a frustration with Christianity, in Europe it's also people getting fed up with secularism, at least in the West. Although certainly, given the current Pope, I do know some people who, on the right, who are very active traditional Catholics, but even they, I mean, they won't even try to defend this current Pope. It's definitely the case. I mean, I think that the rise in paganism in the U.S. and Europe has been ongoing, since the '60s at least. I mean, of course, it even predates that, but I think it's definitely something that emerged with the '60s counterculture, but has just branched off into other forms in the subsequent decades. But I mean, I myself, I would never say I'm anti-Christian. I mean, if somebody finds meaning in Christianity and that's how they choose to define their life, I think that's fine. But for me personally, my own sympathies are more with paganism. I mean, I studied Hinduism and practiced it for a while when I was in India, and I'm very interested in European paganism. So yeah, I think that that's entirely a positive thing. I don't see it becoming the dominant religion in either the U.S. or Europe anytime soon, but it's certainly an interesting subculture.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of divisions in that still. It's going back to the globalism thing again. You tend to get the globalist, more kind of universalist pagans, which I've been a part of, and there's much of that I take inspiration from myself. But there's also then there's the other side, the folkish, more cultural sort of paganism, which is sort of more down to just the one pantheon, dedicate like a allegiance to that one pantheon and stuff. And it seems to be there's that division again. I suppose it's a left and right division kind of within that, which I mean, I've always, and I say to all the pagans I know, it's a shame I think that's like that, because one thing I think with a Christian, you can go into the church and pray, and it doesn't matter whether you're a complete far right nationalist or if you're a complete communist liberal, you go to church and you're a Christian. You know what I mean? I think that paganism seems to be a bit more divided than that, and one of the reasons maybe why it may not completely compete with some of the monotheist Abrahamic faiths out there at the moment, which is a shame, But I just thought it'd be interesting to find out from you, someone that publishes it, to see if what your perspective of it was. So yeah.
Well, I think also the problem is that the reputation of European paganism kind of became tarnished, along with the rest of traditional European culture, as a result of the Second World War. I mean, if you look at the facts, there's very little evident influence of paganism on the Third Reich. But in many circles, people think that, like Hitler was an Odinist or something, and that the Nazi Party was some kind of anti-Christian pagan organization, which really, if you look at the facts, it really wasn't the way it was at all. I mean, that stuff is very much on the fringes and often was just as much subject to suppression as Judaism and other religions in the Third Reich. So it's I think that's partially the reason why it's gotten so politicized. Although I have to say that I really do think personally that one of the strengths of pagan religions is that they are rooted very much in a particular people and a particular culture. Because I do tend to agree with Nietzsche and Alain de Benoit and others who've kind of pointed out that you could see today's form of liberalism and globalization as kind of an outgrowth of Christian universalism. I mean, there's a lot of theories that it actually grew out of that. So I think if you really believe in the defense of a nation or the defense of a folk community or whatever, it's really best to have a religion that's tailored for that community and that doesn't. I mean, now it's again something that some people will come to me and say, "Well, John, you really should become Catholic because that's the religion of Western Europe, and if we're going to save Europe, we all have to be Catholics." And I can't agree with them on that, because I'm like, well, your current Pope, who is supposedly infallible, is calling for more immigration into Europe. So, how are you going to, combat immigration with a universalist ideology that says that, things like ethnicity and nationality don't really matter? So I don't know. I think that the more folkish branches, like the Asatru Folk Assembly in the U.S., which I've met Stephen McNallen before, and I have a lot of respect for him. I actually think it's good that he makes it clear that, this is for Northern European people. On the other hand, I don't think that means you should allow it to become a bigoted thing where you think, we're better than other people because of this. But I don't think that's what it was in the ancient world. I think it was more just, this is a sense of how you defined yourself versus other groups.
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of both in the movement. You probably do get your thugs and your bigots, and you get people that are just generally spiritually enlightened to it. People just need to kind of let people make their own mind up and do what they want, But there you go. What I'd like to touch on before we get to the end is, obviously, at the moment in Europe, you've got the EU referendum coming in the UK. I mean, you live in Hungary, you've seen a lot of Europe. What's your general perception on this? I mean, do you think that the UK will vote to leave? If they do you think that's a good thing? Does it matter? What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, I've visited England a few times in the last couple of years, but I would never, I can't say I've spent enough time there to really have a firm grasp on what people will do. I mean, I certainly hear a lot of hostility against the EU from my friends who are British, but on the other hand, most of them are nationalists. So I don't think I'm getting a fair cross-section of the British public from talking to them. I mean, my own perspective as an outsider, I would never try to tell the British what they should do. But I'm kind of two minds about it, because on one hand, I understand that, okay, the EU as it's constituted now is very problematic and between the way it's kind of limiting the freedom of the individual nation states to realize themselves in favor of a more American-style universalist approach, and plus the fact that it's very much caught up in this sort of militant form of multiculturalism and liberalism that we've been talking about. Yeah, I can see why it would be good to leave, but at the same time, I also recognize that for hundreds of years, Europe has been working towards some sort of unity, and now that something approximating it has actually been realized, I think it would be very tragic in a way to just throw all of that away. I mean, in my mind, it would be better to reform it, more along, the kinds of ideas that we want to see in place, which gives greater recognition to the identities of the various nation states and is more concerned with actually protecting Europe from outside influences. And also, of course, it isn't so slavishly answerable to the United States. I mean, let's face it. I mean, part of the reason why this migrant crisis is occurring is because the U.S. has been busily engaged for the last 15 years in completely ruining the Middle East and Central Asia and North Africa and Western Europe. Even some parts of Eastern Europe have been complicit in that through NATO. So, a real European Union to me would be a much more sovereign entity than what we see today through NATO. But I don't know. I can recognize that it might be overly idealistic to think that the EU can be reformed. So if Britain were to leave the EU, I wouldn't blame them one bit, and maybe it would be a positive thing in the long run. But I think it would certainly be the death knell for the EU. I mean, I don't see how it could survive without England.
Well, my trail of thought is if the UK did leave, it would encourage other nations to kind of consider themselves and then maybe encourage a proper reform. Say, well, look, let's go back to the table. Let's not completely throw this away. Let's talk. Let's work something else out so we can go our own ways, but we'll kind of keep something on the table, But I mean, you're living in Hungary. What's the perception out in Hungary for themselves being in Europe, and how are they looking at this referendum at the moment?
Well, again, I mean, a lot of the Hungarians I know tend to be more nationalist types, so of course they're all opposed to the EU and would very much like to see England leave. Britain, I should say, not just England. But I have to say, though, I mean, my impression of Hungarians generally is that, the Hungary entered the EU, I think it's 12 years ago now in 2004. And I think, like a lot of these Central and East European formerly communist states, they were really hoping that being part of the EU would, make them rich and reform their societies, basically make them, put them on the same level as Western Europe. And I think what Hungarians and other people in Eastern Europe have woken up to is the fact that actually it hasn't worked out so well for them. I mean, they got some financial benefits early on, but those have been drying up in subsequent years. And what they see is that actually Western Europe, I mean, England and France and Germany and so forth, suck out, all of their best minds and their best labor. And, they're kind of left with, sort of the leftovers. And I think that they're starting to realize that, at least in the Hungarian point of view, they see it that the EU is more exploiting them than it's actually that they're deriving much benefit from it. That's my impression anyway. I'm sure, especially here in Budapest, which tends to be more liberal than other parts of Hungary, you could probably find people who think the EU is fabulous and want to stay in. But I think generally the feeling in Hungary is that they're getting kind of tired of it. And certainly, Fidesz and Viktor Orban, their current prime minister, has been running afoul of the EU a lot in recent years. Over the migrant crisis and Russia and other things. And also Jobbik, has actually called for Hungary to leave the EU. So, it's, especially on the right here, there's a great deal of Euroscepticism.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, Shana, you got anything else you'd like to chuck in?
Yeah, actually, a question about Arktos. There was an element that I wanted to ask a little bit more about. There's an independent distribution option for local dissemination of the information. You can, I guess, is it like an independent contract where you can purchase several copies of a book and then share in your area? And then do you have, or will you make electronic copies available for roundtable discussions, open forums, book clubs, that kind of thing?
As far as the Arktos books are concerned?
Yes, on the website there's a link for independent distribution.
Oh, to be honest with you, I had forgotten that was even there. We put that up when we first started the site 6 years ago, but we never really got much of a response to it. So I think once or twice we were contacted by people, and we ended up we sell the books at a certain discount. But we haven't gotten exactly an overwhelming response to that that particular option, I have to say.
I'm surprised because I feel like at this point in our time, in our experience, you would have people that are a little bit paranoid and maybe having covert conversations on the side or getting together in groups like I like to do and have coffee and discuss these kind of controversial elements. So I would think that would be something that Arktos could tap into, especially if you had PDFs, electronic books, or the Audible books made available to people that, instead of having to listen to AM radio or something like that in the U.S., they could listen to a recording of a book that discusses more of these elements that they're interested in, that they may not find in mainstream publishing.
Yeah, well, we've certainly talked about doing audiobooks. The problem is, just that we're very small, and the resources we have to do these things are quite limited. But that's something we might get into eventually. I don't. As far as why we haven't got more response to the group, reading group idea, I don't know. All I can guess is that people are just buying their own copies and doing it on their own. We've always offered bulk discounts to people. I mean, when they want to buy our books, like 5 or more copies or something. So, that's always something we've done anyway. But I don't know why we haven't gotten more response. Maybe we just never really promoted it enough. I'm not sure.
Well, it's definitely something I will be keeping an eye on. Thank you again so much for joining us today, John, and I'm going to hand this back to Paul.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is pretty much where we've got to wrap it up. Is there anything you'd like to let our listeners know about? Any events, any websites, anything you'd like to promote?
Well, I'll, of course, mention the Arktos website. It's www.arktos.com, and that's ARKTOS. We also have a Facebook page where we post announcements about whenever we publish a new book or about events that we're involved in or things of that nature. And also we have sort of a side project now that I'm also involved with, which is called Write On. It's like an online blog with many different authors. That's at www.writeon, all one word, of course, .net. So people might, if they're interested in Arktos, they might be interested in checking that out, although it has a more strongly political focus than Arktos does. Okay. But no, I can't think of anything else. I mean, we're doing a series of Kickstarter campaigns right now. We don't have one at the moment, but we're going to be starting one within the next week or two for Alain de Benoit's View from the Right. Alain de Benoit was the founder of the French New Right, which is widely considered, the most important sort of reconception of the right in post-war Europe. And View from the Right is considered his most important work. So we're going to start a Kickstarter campaign to finally get that into English.
Great. Okay. Well, I mean, I think what you guys are doing great. I support anything that's throwing alternative stuff out there so people can use their own brains, have a read, take or leave it, and just educate themselves. So I'll congratulate you on that. And I wish you and Arktos all the best for the future. And thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.
It'd be great to have you back on again and sort of catch up with some new developments in the future. So, yeah, we look forward to that.
Anytime. Yeah, sure. Just ask.
And that was John Morgan, another fascinating one. Did you enjoy that, Shauna?
Most definitely, Paul. It's interesting to get an idea of what kind of perspectives lead to a publishing company that's so far outside of the realm of mainstream.
Yeah, no, totally. And any political spectrum, I'm always ready to hear. I've made no secret that I've been very interested and got a kind of like a soft spot for some of the right wing movements out there, because I think they're very much misunderstood in many regards. And the whole political spectrum seems to be so uncertain and unclear at the moment. I think it's important that we just listen to everything and make our own minds up rather than get brainwashed by everything in the mainstream.
Yeah, you have to use a little bit of discernment. I'm talking about the political element. I wonder if there's like a questionnaire or a survey for, how they do personality tests to tell you if you fall more in line with the right or the left, conservative or libertarian, etc. Because I still, with all of these conversations that we've had on THA Talks, I still feel like I'm a little bit in murky waters when it comes to the political.
Well, that's just it. The definition of left and right wing isn't what it used to be. And we just holding on to these cliches. So the dominant political movement uses every cliche and negative aspect it can to attack and keep the other one down. And as a reaction of that, that's why you are getting these sort of more aggressive far-right groups. And no group is perfect, because at the end of the day, if you're pulled completely to the right, then you don't give a damn about the left. And if you're pulled completely to the left, then you don't give a damn about the right, which in itself is a dogmatic perspective on everything. So I like to look at all perspectives and make my own mind up. And I think there's a bit of mess everywhere at the moment, but I appreciate what John Morgan's doing at Arktos Media there. Diplomatic guy, you can sit down and have a discussion with him about it, and that is the most fundamental thing that you need at the moment, I think, from both sides, whatever political spectrum, that you can sit down and have a humane discussion about what's going on and learn and get your point across.
Yeah, I think Arktos is one of those examples of the phoenix. We're burning out the old ways of doing things and finding our own way. So it's a great thing to promote. Absolutely.
Well, that's all we got time for this week. Thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. Keep telling your friends about the show. Keep linking the show on your social media network sites. We do appreciate that, and it does help us out. Make sure you stay strong, keep doing your thing, and we're going to be looking forward to the next one. Till the next time, take it easy. Bye.
Take care.